Hey all, I'm sure that you're very disappointed that you're not meeting for this lab block today, but you lucked out. You get to hear from me anyway, even though I'm currently up in Boston. So today what we're going to be doing is doing a little tutorial here on how to use Excel to make effective graphs. Now, many of you have used Excel before to make graphs, but frankly, I'm sure that you weren't really very good at it. Um, so what I hope to do with this set of two tutorials that you're going to be taking or watching over the next couple of days is to really hone your skills of making graphs, effective graphs. It's one of the most powerful things that you can do in science because you really can convince a reader of your conclusions or your point of view with an effective graphic. And that's what graphs are all about. And so let's get started on this. I want you all to focus in on this set of data that I have up here that I've just highlighted in gray because this is sort of the simplest way that we're going to be going about doing this stuff. So a simple data set where you have here in this column the year, and this column you have the number of wolves in the population for this particular area. And I'm sure that all of you, even without even starting this tutorial, have a good sense of how you would put together a graph like this. Don't forget that you always want to have the independent variable on the x-axis and the dependent variable on the y-axis. In this case, year is the independent variable. So if we were going to do this, it's very important that you always make that assessment in the first place, independent versus dependent variable. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to select this data right here. And then I'm going to go up to Insert. And in this case, I'm going to use a scatter plot, okay, an XY scatter plot here. And I'm just going to start off as the simplest XY scatter, which is this one that I'm selecting right here. And you can see here, you can pull down the corners to make this a little bit bigger if you want here, that I've created a pretty simple graph here. I haven't titled anything. That's always something that I'm going to require you to do. And it's very important that when you set a title, you don't do, so for example, you don't say year versus number of wolves, okay? What you want to say is something that convinces the reader your point of view. So you can say recovery of wolves from 1850, or actually let's say the recovery started, it looks like in, when was this? In 1950. Recovery wolves from 1950 to 2000. Okay, so it's very important that I made a title that describes what I want the readers to get out of my graph. The other thing that I haven't done here is I didn't provide titles for my axes, so it's essential that I do that. Let me close this out here. So how do I go about doing that process? I actually think that the fastest way to do this, most efficient thing to do, is to go up to this thing that, oops, let me click on there. It says Quick Layout. So you click on Quick Layout, and you'll see here that they have things, they have different graphs set up in certain ways that allow you to be able to go in and label things. So I'm just going to go with this one right here, click on that. And it's not important to have a, when you only have one series of data, you don't need to have a key. So I'm going to just delete that thing. So I hit backspace, sorry, you didn't see that. And then for this axis title, I'm just going to click on the axis title. And in this case, it's going to be wolf population. And down here on my x-axis, oh, I'm going to have year. And there we have it. Now, the other thing that I want you to note here, oh, well, actually, I guess this showed a piece of data. I don't need to have that selected, is that I have not tried to connect these dots with individual line segments, lines between each one of these. That's very important because a lot of students think that, oh, well, you have to draw a line among all your points. That's absolutely not the case. Sometimes you shouldn't do that. And in fact, unless you absolutely are sure that you understand the relationship between adjacent points in a graph, you really shouldn't draw a line in there. If you want to, you can draw a curve of best fit in this case. But for the most part, I would just sort of leave it alone unless you absolutely think that you must do that. You have to have some reason beforehand to know that that's the case. Now, what if we did want to put a curve of best fit into this? Let me show you how you go about doing that. Sorry, Abigail just came up to me to ask where everybody was in the house. So, if you want to put a curve to connect to these points, a curve of best fit, what you're going to do is you'll hover over one of the points and you'll click on it so that they all light up. And then you're going to right click and you'll see that there's an option to add trend line. Boom. Go ahead and do that. And notice that it immediately decides that, oh, I'm going to make this a linear trend line. Well, guess what? There's nothing to tell you that this is going to be a linear relationship. So it's very rare where you're going to have something like that. That doesn't make any sense for this case. And exponential, there's nothing to believe that it's exponential, nothing to believe that it's logarithmic, power, or moving average. Well, actually, you could do moving average. So really what you want to do is a polynomial. Polynomial takes into account all the points and we'll draw a curve that shows the trend, a downward trend from 1850 through to 1950, and then an upward sweep from 1950 to 2000. But again, in this case, you really don't need to have included a trend line. So I put it there just so you know how to do it, but there's no reason for us to put it there. Okay, so that's a really easy graph. And let's get rid of this one because frankly, the graph that you're going to be creating for your cut flour lab for the flour food tests won't be as simple as this one. Bye. So now let's take a look at dataset 2. And you'll see here I have a huge amount of data for dataset 2. It scrolls all the way down to the bottom of the page here. Okay, so it's about what I think is 180 different data points here. So you might say to yourself, I guess it's less than 180. So if you were going to graph this, maybe you would say, all right, well, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to take all this data, scroll all the way down to the bottom. Oh, and I'm going to then go up to my insert and go to my scatter plot. Scatter plot's always a good thing to start with. Hit my scatter plot, and this is what I'm given. And you might say, there it is, I'm going to turn this in. But I want you to think about this. This doesn't really give you any information because all you have is a whole bunch of points all stuck around 70. So there are two things that are very wrong with this. First of all, you didn't take, or I didn't, take into account which one was the independent variable and which one was the dependent variable. Let me go back to this data set here. I want you to notice that I have the inches and then I have the identification of the boy in the fourth form. So we certainly know that this ID is going to be the independent variable if you are choosing an independent versus dependent variable because the number of inches associated with the child is going to be dependent on who that child is. Okay, so this is the independent variable here and this is the dependent variable. So the reality is that I created a graph, but that graph had the independent and dependent variable switched. So if you look at it here, how do I go about switching dependent and independent variable? All right, so I want to switch my X and Y categories. So I'm going to click on this entire vertical axis, my Y axis. I'm going to right click again and I'm going to go to select data. Okay. Now notice here that if I look to see where my X values are and I want to select a different set of data, I'm going to go over and click onto this. And then I'm going to select my data by dragging this marquee area all the way around my data that oh shoot. Oh, stinkers. Move this thing out of the way. Come on, get out of the way. Hold on a second. Okay, let's try that again. Stinking graph was in the way. Okay, so going back to select data, my X values, I want my X values to be the second column here, not the first column. So I'm going to drag all the way down to the bottom. Dragging, dragging, dragging slowly. There's that stinking graph. All right, right here. Okay. Once I've selected all up, you can tell it's all selected because the marquee is flashing all the way around there. Then I'm going to go up to here. Daggone it, people are calling me. That was Larissa calling. Sorry for the interruption. Okay. Where am I going here? Oh, yeah. Now, notice that I could have easily just sort of copied and pasted this and switched them. So think about that. You can do that as well if you want to switch the X and the Y values. But I'm going to go ahead and continue to do the process that I was just showing you moments ago. So now I'm going to select my Y values, click on that, and now I'm going to select the first column, drag all the way down. Isn't this fun? Okay, there we go. And then click this right here. It goes in there, and then I'm going to hit OK. All right, now if I look at my graph, at least I have the X and Y values switched up here. But it's still a pretty stupid graph here because this isn't really telling you much. In fact, I consider this as a graph that's essentially a glorified data table because it's not like this is telling me much that this data table doesn't tell me. The other thing that's very important here is that somehow we've valued the idea that ID, the student's ID number, is important here, and that being ID number, say 9,000, is important to make sure that it's over here on the right side, whereas if you had ID number 1,000, it would be somewhere over here, as if that's important. Keep in mind that this ID number was very likely a randomly assigned thing, okay, this ID. It's just so that we wouldn't reveal the name of the actual boy. So the ID number means nothing. And again, seeing the scatter plot with each of the individual pieces of data on the scatter plot really actually tells me less than this table that actually gives me the numbers. So if I wanted to know, say, for example, what this was, I'd actually have to hover over the point to see that that was the value of 62 for point number 2899. Now, how stupid is that? That doesn't make any sense that we would waste our time doing that because you could go to value number 2899 right here and see for yourself that that's 62. So this graph does absolutely nothing. Whoa, what happened to there we go. This graph does absolutely nothing for us. So this is not a good graph. That's not an effective graph making technique. So even though I showed you how to switch X and Y, frankly, the whole thing is useless. We're going to delete it. Boom. So what do? You look at a whole set of data like this. How do you graph that? Well, first of all, you have to think about what it is that you're trying to show. And in this case, I'd probably want to show, I want to know sort of what the most populous height is in the fourth form. What are most of the kids? What's the height of most of the kids? And what are some of the outliers? So to do that, what I would need to do is generate a statistic. And in this case, I'm going to do this. I'm going to say, all right, how many boys are 74 inches? How many boys are 68 inches? 70, 69, 67. Now, that of course takes some time because you have to actually collect that data up by counting up all the number 74s, all the number 68s, all the number 70s. And in fact, if you look here at this hidden little table right here, I'm going to color these things black. Oh, what happened? Oh, there we go. So what I've done here is I have done just that. You can see here that there are only 2 kids who are as short as 60 inches, and there are only 2 kids who are as tall as 76 inches. And then you can see here, there's a ton of kids who are 68 inches tall. So I've created what's called a frequency here, the number of times you see that piece of data. And if I graph this instead, so let's go ahead and do a scatter plot for this. Go to Insert, go to my scatter plot, do the simplest scatter plot here. In looking at this graph here, this is certainly much more useful than the previous glorified data table that I had moments ago, because what it does is it really gives us a sense of where most of the heights are. Now, it is odd that we have this one point up here where we have a ton of students at this height, so I'm not sure what explains that. But the idea here is that you can see that most of the heights are going to fall between, say, I don't know, 65 and 72 inches. Now, this is not as good a graph as it could be. So first of all, we need to make sure that we go in here and we do some labeling of the graph. So chart title, most, the most prevalent height at CRH is 68 inches. All right, so that's a conclusive title. And then I can have over here the frequency, the number of students who have that particular height. And over here is, come on, Chang, height in inches. Always important to say what your unit is. But, oh, and I can get rid of this because it's only a single piece of data, or a single data set, I should say. And I'm going to go ahead and close that so you can see the entirety of the graph. But I do have a problem here. Let me just delete that, which is that I have this huge amount of open space here, which makes no sense whatsoever. So we need to make sure that when you choose the where to start the axes, you don't necessarily have to start at 0, 0 if it makes no sense to do that, if it actually hides a trend or doesn't allow you to enhance what you're trying to show to your audience as well. In this case, I think it might not be a bad idea to start at 55 inches. So how do you do that? Well, you go ahead and you click on the axis, right click, you're going to format the axis, and you can see here over on this side, we have a minimum and a maximum, and we go 0 to 80, but I want my minimum now to be 55. And I go ahead and close that down, and you can see that shrinks it right on up. You can see here now that we have a much better sense of the shape of this data set because we got rid of all that excess white space. Okay, so make sure you don't fail to do that for me. Okay. Okay, so let's cruise over to data set number 3 here. This is the amount of Mr. D's ice cream sold. Okay, and I have January 1st through January 31st, and I have July 1st through July 31st, and I have the number of scoops that are sold. All right, so you might say to yourself, oh, this is one of those things again, I don't want to make a glorified data table because that may not work. But in this case, these are very important. The date is actually an important piece of information. All right, so you can't just sort of throw that away and say, I'm going to see how many times we have 43 scoops versus 0 scoops. That's not going to make any sense. We actually want to see if there's any trend across a given month in terms of the number of scoops that Mr. D's sells, whether it's in January or whether it's in July. So first things first, let's go ahead and take a look at January. So I'm going to scroll down, I'm going to collect all this data. I'm going to go to my insert button to scatterplot. Okay. Now you may look at that and say, what, see, Chang, that doesn't tell me anything. Well, you got to be careful because sometimes things tell you a lot more than you realize. Now, if you take a look at what we have going on here, we seem to have, if you look carefully, this wave pattern. It goes up and down and up and down and up and down, etc. across here. And that may not be immediately visible because you can't really see that trend going up and down here when you're just sort of staring at it. So this is something that you need to train your mind to do, to look and see if there's a pattern that exists here that's revealing. And in fact, this is kind of tricky, it is revealing because it turns out that whatever year this was, I don't even know, you have these peaks in terms of the amount of ice cream that's sold, and they happen at what seem to be 7-day intervals. Now, would you be too surprised to hear that they sell more ice cream on weekends? I don't think so. And so that's exactly what we can see here is that we have this jump up on Fridays and Saturdays, and then a drop back down midweek, and then a jump up on Friday and Saturday, and jump back down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in fact, it's very revealing what's going on here. And perhaps if we wanted to, although it's not going to be great, and if we wanted to sort of add a trend line, you'll see it won't be perfect. So let's do polynomial here. Doesn't work, right? Doesn't look good. A moving average, however, does work in this situation. Okay, so in this case, you can see that we have these ups and downs, and they happen at 7-day intervals, meaning the weekend. So let's leave that as it is right now. I'm not going to bother changing the chart title or the axis, because the big thing here is what I want to do is keep this data set on this chart or on this graph, and I want to add the data set for July. Is that what it was? July? Yeah. To the same exact set of axes. That's going to be something that is really critical to be able to do, because you may not be working with only one data set. In this case, you want to work with multiple months. So let's go ahead and try that. So the first thing I want to do is to move this graph up and out of our way, because I want to be able to get access to this data. So I'm just going to move it off to the side there. So what we're trying to do here is, look, there's my daughter jumping in the air, is we're trying to import a data set into our existing set of axes. So this is a pretty straightforward process, but before we do that, it's a good idea to first label up this stuff. I'm getting a whole bunch of messages from Ellie Sandberg. I missed what that was. So what I want to do is I want to select this data set, because I'm going to make it, oh, actually, no, it's better to do it this way. I will go up to my chart design, and I'm going to add a chart element, and that will be a legend. I'll make it come to the right there. And then I'm going to tap my data, and I'm going to go to select data, and I'm going to call this data January. Okay, so now we know that the blue circles represent the data for January. Then I'm going to go up to data, and I'm going to chart add data, click on that, and then I'm going to select the column of data that I want to put onto this existing set of axes. Now the 1 through the 31 is going to remain the same, so what I really want to do is select up the scoops for July, just that column, and go ahead and put it in there, so hit OK. And then you'll see here that I have series 2. I have January, which used to have, remember it was moments ago, it was peaked up there. In fact, let's take a look at it just before. So notice here that January has a top mark at around 50. But when I add in the July data, where we have top marks that are, around 785, then suddenly that January gets really short and flat, and the data for July starts to dominate. But you still see the same sort of up and down trend associated with the weekends. So let's see though, are the weekends the same date? Probably not. So let's go ahead and add a trend line here, and I'm going to go ahead and use the moving average. And you can see here that the weekends are slightly shifted, which makes sense because it's not like every weekend is going to be the 7th and the 8th of the month. Now, the other thing I want to do here is continue to work on my labeling up of my graph. So instead of January, now I'm going to click on series 2, and I'm going to label this July, hit OK. And now you can see here that I have this cute little legend here representing the 2 data sets that I put in here. Again, I didn't label my axes. I didn't provide a table, a title to this graph, so it's not perfect, but at least it does show significant trends here. We show, first of all, that there's a lot more ice cream eaten overall in July, no surprise there, and that you have peaks that happen at 7-day intervals, which correspond with the weekends associated with each of those particular months. Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to stop there, and I'll have you guys Come back tomorrow to view the second installment of this set of screencasts on how to use Excel to make graphs.